Either you're a lousy doctor or a lousy liar. This is the No Fear podcast. We know what scares you. I'm Matt.
I'm Mel.
And I'm Lisa. And this is the No Fear Cast, the podcast where we dissect horror and all the things that scare us. This is season 4, episode 23. It's the summer, and we normally like to relax a bit with what we do in the summer. And so in past summers, we've indulged in lighter fare like sci-fi and blockbusters, which were so much more fun. This summer, we decided we would tackle some 70s disaster movies. We're going to invite you to join us as we discuss the gem from 1976, that is the Cassandra Crossing. I don't know why we thought this was a good idea, but we did it anyway. I will let you know, listeners, spoilers, it was not a good idea to watch this movie. So Mel, I'm going to throw it to you. Why don't you give a little synopsis of this for our listeners? Because the Cassandra Crossing is not as well known as something like The Towering Inferno or The Poseidon Adventure, or maybe even Airport. I had never heard of it before. I just thought it sounded like an interesting, if not bonkers, plot. And we watched it.
Well, thank you for giving me this Sisyphean task of attempting to explain what happens in this movie. I distinctly remember the moment you discovered this movie and were like, we need to check this out. And yeah, it was very interesting. That's one way to put it. So, listeners, we have watched, I'm trying to think back now, all the disaster movies we've watched. We've seen The Poseidon Adventure, we've seen Airport, we've seen The Towering Inferno. And so we had, water and fire and flight. And now we have, I'm not sure, I'll attempt to explain it, but a train movie, I guess, might be the best way to describe it. So, as Lisa said, this movie came out in 1976. It was the studio that made the movie was Associated General Films, which I had never heard of until I watched this movie. I saw in a couple places that it was kind of an Italian, West German, British effort, I guess. So you have a mix of Italian and British and American actors in it. And at first glance, I mean, you have a stable of pretty impressive talent in this movie, though as some critics said, they might have been miscast in some ways. So you have Sophia Loren, who is playing the wife of the doctor that is on the train, and she is they've been divorced twice, and she's kind of, I guess, following him and trying to get him to read her latest book, which is like about him and how, I guess, much more awesome he was when he was younger. And it was unclear what she was trying to achieve because they were still fighting with each other. So I'm not 100% sure there, but she kind of becomes like his assistant when the plague happens. And you have Richard Harris, who, of course, was the first Dumbledore, but did many, many, many more things than that. And he is the doctor who just happens to be on the train and is trying to deal with the plague that ends up inadvertently ending up on this train that's going across Europe. You have Ava Gardner, who is the wife of, I couldn't figure out if it was like a German munitions guy or maybe like something more shady, like an arms dealer. I wasn't sure. It was a German guy who likes weapons and makes them. And she's apparently having an affair with this heroin addict, Martin Sheen, who's being chased by, I don't know, I guess O.J. Simpson was supposed to be an American, like, I don't know, member of Interpol or maybe FBI. I don't know. But he was chasing after Martin Sheen to arrest him for his drug use. And of course, Simpson was in Towering Inferno. And then one of the other big names that listeners recognize would be Burt Lancaster, who was the airport manager in Airport and in many, many other films. And he played the American corporal, I think, the military person who was at the stand-in, I guess, for the WHO, the WHO is the IHO, the International Health Organization. And so the premise of this movie is that these members of a Swiss peace group, for some reason, like to use weapons and bombs, and they find out that the evil Americans, have a bioweapon that is a pneumonic plague, like pneumonia, I guess. And the Americans claim that they stumbled upon it by accident and it cannot be destroyed. So they must put it in the International Health Organization's bank to be studied. The International Health Organization apparently didn't know it was there, which is weird, and didn't realize there were American military guarding it, which is also strange. And so these Swiss peace dudes who are super into peace go in with their guns and shoot some folks, try to set a bomb to destroy the pneumonic plague, which I think would spread it, but I'm not an expert, I suppose. And they end up getting shot and throwing the pneumonic plague like all over the place. And so the Burt Lancaster character comes to work with the IHO doctor to try to figure out what to do. Meanwhile, one of the peace dudes ends up on this train. He's obviously sick. And for some reason, he wanders randomly up and down the train in first class, smiling and touching everybody. So he's holding babies and touching kids in the face and yakking over rice in the kitchen. And every time he does these things, there's like this screeching music that happens. And then later when you see people start to be sick or eat the rice, there's also this really annoying screeching music that was like terrifying my dog. And so the plague starts spreading all over the train. I'm going to attempt to explain the rest of the film, but basically what happens is Burt Lancaster and the higher ups in America decide it would be better to put a bunch of people with weapons on the train to shoot people when they try to leave, seal the train and send it, instead of stopping it and quarantining everybody, they're going to send it over a bridge that is in disrepair and put them in a camp that used to be a concentration camp and quarantine them there in Poland. And while they're going, the doctor realizes that it really isn't that bad, that it has mutated into like the common cold. And whereas they thought tons of people were going to die, only a couple did. And one had like a heart attack, and it's unclear if she was just scared of being in this movie or actually it was the illness. And so they mutiny and try to take the guns from the military. Everybody's shooting each other. Martin Sheen tries to climb on the train to get to the front to tell them, because apparently no one can talk to the engineer. He's like locked up in a soundproof box or something. And at the end of the movie, they manage to disconnect the train. The front half goes over the bridge, crashes, everybody dies. This back half is okay, and all these people go off to possibly spread the plague that really wasn't the plague, while Burt Lancaster tells the president of the United States that everybody died and we're all safe now. And that's the end of the movie. We don't know how the people will get back or if they get medical attention. The last thing that's said in the movie is that Burt Lancaster's character and the Italian doctor are being surveilled by government agents to decide what to do with them. We have no idea why or what's going to happen to them. And then, of course, there's all sorts of little weird mini plots that have nothing to do with the main plot, kind of scattered throughout, that I'm not really going to talk about right now. Matt, Lisa, how was that attempt to hit the main points of the movie? Was there anything major that I missed there or didn't explain to the best of my ability?
No, I think you did an admirable job with filtering out the plot of that movie. It was bonkers. I finished watching it and I had this sort of like a few moments of like, what in the world did I just watch? Because I mean, it's like multiple plots all smashed together in a blender and none of it quite makes sense. And like, this is the sort of thing that like I would expect to be seeing on like MST3K, Mystery Science Theater 3000, or the podcast How Did This Get Made? I mean, this is absolute insanity. and like you said, like there's so many well-known good actors and actresses that it's so surprising that it's such a colossal failure. I mean, I can only chalk it up to bad writing and bad directing, because I mean, that was, yeah. But I think you overall did a good job of distilling the plot, because it really is way all over the place.
I mean, this is a movie that when it premiered, the critics booed and hissed and laughed at it, which is kind of sad, but I can understand why.
Well, then I must have been one of the critics too. I don't suppose I mean I didn't actually boo and hiss while I was watching this, but like I completely understand the sentiment. It's I mean, let's start with even just the beginning because it opens with the Swedish peace group people like infiltrating this WHO, pretending to be like have somebody who's sick or something. Like one of them is pretending to be ill, and they're wheeling him in, and there's all this like chaos, and the guy that escapes, who doesn't get killed from the Swedish terrorists, like jumps out of a window. And like when I was watching it, my first thought was like, is this a ground floor window? Because it looks like it's on like the 10th floor or something. But no, apparently it was the ground floor. And also, why do you keep your bioweapons in something that can be easily broken through with the window? Like, wouldn't it be in a much more secured room?
The door said keep out, Matt. It said keep out.
It did. It did. I mean, I dare say, since we're talking about disaster movies, I mean, I think this is categorized as a disaster movie because it's a disaster of a movie, not a disaster movie. Like, it's just like I've only gotten like 5 minutes into the plot there, and there's like 15 or 20 things that make you go, "What? Huh? Like, what were they thinking?" And yeah, it's all over the place. So
Y'all
yeah,
are
go.
talking about it like it's an actual plot driven movie. And I don't know whether to be just impressed with the fact that you guys can talk about this movie like it is a movie, or just really confused. Because I mean, yes, it's a disaster movie because there's an outbreak of a disease that turns out not to be deadly. And then there's a speeding train, and I guess they know that if they go over the bridge, the Cassandra Crossing of the movie, that that if they go over this bridge called the Cassandra Crossing, that they will die. Surely if they go over it. So you've got like, I guess those are the two disasters that they're trying to avoid: is first stay alive from the plague, and then second stay alive by not going over the bridge. But y'all are glossing over the things in this movie that just I'm still trying to come to terms with. For instance, that Sophia Loren has no eyebrows. Like none. I couldn't stop looking at her. And she is a beautiful woman. I think she is one of the most beautiful of, like, if I think back to old Hollywood, she's right up there with it. She has no eyebrows in this movie. At one point, now this is a movie about an outbreak. So if you had read the description I read, I'm imagining if you took the movie Speed, where the bus just could not stop, and then added Outbreak, and like put that monkey from Outbreak on the bus and like started infecting people. I thought, this is going to be the movie. Like, it's going to be wonderful. It's going to be disaster upon disaster. It's going to like up the stakes. But it didn't. Instead, it gives you a good 3 minutes of basically what I can only describe as a concert of a hippie band singing a song. Like a full-on music video on the train of these people singing the song that I didn't know. And one thing I can't even utter this sentence. We had a priest in this movie who was really an undercover DEA agent, played by O.J. Simpson. And while he's in his priest uniform, he swats at a little kid blowing bubbles with his Bible. I don't even know if this... I'm struggling here because this movie I mean, all those things I listed have nothing to do with the plots. Like, nothing.
You sound
And yet,
deeply offended by this movie, Lisa.
I'm not deeply offended. I'm troubled, and I'm trying to understand. Like, I'm just trying to understand where this movie is coming from, because, and there are dogs. There are so many sick dogs in this movie.
well, yeah,
Like,
and the sick dog is how they begin to discover that it may not be a lethal infection because they're monitoring a sick dog at the IHO, if you recall.
Yeah, the one they
yes,
take off the train. Yeah.
I'm trying to imagine the process of, like, what the writer's room was like for this. Like, what was the meeting like as they were putting together this script, and they were like, we're going to make the disaster movie to end all disaster movies, because I guarantee you that had to be the way this movie, like, got started. And they're like, we're not going to have one disaster, but we're going to have like 3. You know, it's going to be a speeding train that you got to stop, and then there's going to be a government that's trying to kill you, and then there's going to be an illness that might be the plague and might take out. I mean, at one point they said it had a 60% death rate. Like, that's, you know, they're calculating the numbers here. They're like, there's 1,000 people on this train. It's a 60% death rate. That means only 400 people are walking off. And then people start getting sick, like, left and right. And you're thinking, oh my gosh, here it comes. Like, it's starting. And then that part of the movie is over so fast. Like, they realize it's just basically the common cold. Because of, I can't even remember what they said. It was because of oxygen.
Yeah, it was oxygenated. Yeah.
The oxygenated train is mutating the virus and making it run its course, like, rapidly, and basing it, like, what did they say? It was like the virus was killing itself from exhaustion because of oxygen. I mean, there are just so many things that I was like, at what point? I mean, at one point did they think, oh yeah, you know what this movie needs? It needs O.J. Simpson dressed as a priest, but he's not really a priest, hitting at bubbles with a Bible.
I will say this, though. The movie, even though it was like a little over 2 hours long, actually kind of kept my attention the whole time, because there were always things happening, even if they were crazy and didn't make sense. Whereas Airport, I was just like sitting there watching people talk on a radio back and forth for a while in a cockpit, and then watching some people in the back of the plane talk for a while, and then watching some people on the ground talk for a while. And for people who like Airport, I'm sorry, I was pausing it and being like, oh my God, we're like over an hour in and I don't even know what the disaster is. So I will say this for Cassandra Crossing. It may have been insane, but there was always something happening. It just didn't make any sense why.
Oh, there was definitely something to look at throughout the entire movie. It was just a constant barrage of things happening. But yeah, like Lisa said, it all felt so disconnected from itself.
Oh.
You know?
And we forget, because the priest was an undercover DEA agent. He was chasing down, I guess, a drug dealer played by Martin Sheen. And at one point,
yeah,
he reveals himself, who's like going through withdrawals because he's on a train that he can't get off of. And so he's in bad shape. And he reveals himself as like the agent. He's like, I've been tracking this guy everywhere. But then he doesn't arrest him. And the whole reason for not arresting him is they go, he's on a train. Where is he going to go? And I'm like, that's not how this works. Like, I don't know any law enforcement agent who had been tracking somebody across Europe and then just is like, oh, we're on a train, so I'm not going to arrest you now. Like,
but Martin Sheen's character was an extreme mountain climber and was going to save them all by climbing on the train while it was moving. But unfortunately, somebody just shot him off the side of the train.
Well, I mean, yeah. But obviously that was why he couldn't be arrested, because he had to attempt to be a hero later. But they hadn't even, I don't think, brought up that plot point yet. Like, it was just, it was just, oh, I've come here. I finally found you. I'm going to arrest you now. And they're all like, oh, leave him alone. Where's he going? We're on a train. I was just like, what?
I think perhaps my favorite moment of just WTF in this movie, and that was probably number 2 for me, but my all-time favorite was when the rabbi gets shot. So yes, there's also a rabbi on this train, and when they stop it to like hermetically seal it, to keep the passengers or whatever from escaping, he sneaks off. He's seen by the military, I guess. They shoot him, and you think, oh my God, he's dead. And then they pick him up and say, get back on the train. We don't have, I don't remember exactly what it was, but basically like, we don't want you out here. So apparently he got shot in the arm, even though he fell down like he'd been shot like multiple times in the chest. And then that's pretty much it. Like he's got a little bit of blood on his sleeve for the rest of the movie, but he's in perfectly good health. So for someone who's been shot,
I was surprised. It was just a little scratch. Yeah.
He said it went at one point he addresses it, but you're right. He says, they're like, oh my gosh, you've been shot. And he's like, it went all the way through or something like that. Like
something as if that wouldn't hurt as well.
Right.
Or cause massive blood loss.
Yeah, that was really weird. And we should just go ahead that I'm going to pin the faults in this movie, not necessarily on the actors themselves. I loved the rabbi. I loved his character. I loved his storyline. He was one of the characters that I really liked. But there was so much like disjointed plot lines that never fully came together or came together in a really bizarre way. And the dialogue just in places, there was so much just info dumping, or like in that case, forgetting something had happened. Because at one point early in the movie, when they announced that they're not going to let the people off the train, a couple of things happened that were really bizarre. So you have this IHO or whatever, the health organization, realizing what's happening. And they're like, we have to quarantine these people. We cannot let them off under any circumstance. We cannot let them off this train. So they decide to reroute the train. So the orders that they are given are, if anybody gets off the train, you shoot to kill. Like they even say it several times. And I remember thinking, you can't just say that in a movie and not show it. Like that's what raises the stakes in the movie. And so when the rabbi got off the train, I fully thought he was going to be gunned down. And he looked like, you're right, Matt, he looked like he was shot multiple times. And then he falls down and you realize it's just his arm. And they stand over him and they say, we don't want to kill anybody, get back on the train. And I was like, well, that was a letdown. I mean, not that I wanted to see somebody die, certainly not the rabbi, but at the same time, I was like, you can't just give those orders and then not follow through. And then when they told everybody on the train, they made the announcement that they were rerouting the train to Poland. Number one, I don't understand why they felt they had to make that announcement, but they told everybody, this is what they said. They said, terrorists are placing bombs all along the tracks, and so we have to take you another way. Which, as far as I could tell, that was just made up, right?
It was supposed to, they were going to tell them that to keep them from panicking, which I thought was kind of messed up.
Yes, I was like, didn't they all panicked? Because that's what you do when you're on a train and they tell you that terrorists have taken over and put bombs all up and down the tracks. Everybody panics and wants off the train. I was like, who is running this operation? This is the worst idea. Like, this is the worst plan anybody has come up with. And it was like that at multiple points in this movie where you're like, who is coming up with these ideas? Because that's not a good plan. Like from any which way you look at it, it wasn't good. Like, why would they tell people that? And then like, we don't want people to panic, so we're going to tell them there are bombs out there. I'm sorry. It was bizarre.
Yeah, it was strange. And it seemed like, well, I mean, it was the Americans, I guess. It's Burt Lancaster, but he's shorthand for the Americans. They're causing all the problems too, because from the beginning of it, but there's no explanation why, because there's no real explanation of Burt Lancaster's character or his assistant. Because like the Italian doctor is always asking why they're doing certain things. Why did you put your dangerous plague thing in this room when somebody could get it? They're like, oh, we were trying to destroy it and we put it. I still understand that. And then later she's like, well, just stop them in a town and get them all off and quarantine them somewhere. And they're like, we'll tell them there's bombs all over the track and we'll get them to Nuremberg and take them off the train. And then they get them to Nuremberg and they're like, we don't want to deal with this. We're just going to send them over a bridge. It's going to collapse and then we won't have to think about it anymore. And then they do that. And then at the end, apparently the government or whatever is investigating Burt Lancaster. So there's all this like really like evil, insidious stuff like going on in the background from the government, which kind of it wasn't done this well, but it reminded me a little bit of what we've talked about in the past with corporations and politicians forcing people to do things that are obviously bad and going to kill them because they don't want to tell them the truth about what's going on. But it was handled kind of ham-handedly, and it had me confused most of the time because Burt Lancaster was just kind of like the arm of an evil empire without ever explaining like why he was doing all this stuff that made no sense. Yeah.
The way they played that up, I think, coupled with the fact that the people who came onto the train to contain it were all in those like full on plague suits, so it, you know, white from head to toe. I kept getting confused at moments. And as I was writing notes, like when I was writing the note about them shooting the rabbi, I was like, and then the stormtrooper stands over him. And I was like, wait, wrong movies. Because it had that feel at times where you didn't really understand why, like, the American general was so played up so evil, and like why he was making his little like plague minions do what they were doing. And they kept saying, even when they were on the train and they realized the plan was to take him over the bridge, at one point one of the main characters looks at him and says, you realize you're going to die with us, like you're on this train too. And they were just kind of like, well, we can't defy orders. And I was just like, I wanted to know that storyline. Like, I wanted to know more about why he was controlling it. Like, why was he being so evil? Because it was clear, Mel, I think you're right that they were playing up that kind of evil government / corporation has nefarious plans at the cost of life. But that was never explained. When they were just, I mean, to me, he read as a very like Darth Vader character, you know, like, this is my evil empire and I will do what I have to do to protect it. But it just wasn't explained. I don't know. It was confusing to me.
I mean, the best, well, best is the wrong word. The clearest moment where I think they tried to make you realize that, yeah, it was kind of this stormtrooper type thing is the end when the doctor is like, so I was right the whole time. You were just trying to kill these people. And he says, we needed to contain the disease at all costs. We did not just need to destroy the bacteria with treatment. We needed to destroy the idea of it so no one ever knows it existed. Those people were a sacrifice. And if that bizarre, like in your face exposition hadn't been thrown in in the last 10 minutes of the movie, I would have been like, I agree with the Italian doctor, but there wasn't enough characterization. So instead of doing the explanation work, they're just like, let's just have him at the end say that he wanted to sacrifice the people so no one would ever know we had this bioweapon. The other governments were kind of complicit at one point because he claims, we don't know if we can trust him or not, but he claims to the Italian doctor that he tried to do quarantines in other countries, but all the countries in Europe said that people weren't allowed to step foot on their land. And we do see military and police at a couple of the depots to keep the train from stopping because they don't want the sick people to come onto their into their space, their national space. But still, that was just like in passing. I mean, you could have watched a 2 hour movie, and if you just happened to miss that, you wouldn't have understood that particular um, part of it.
Well, and even if the idea, which yes, you're right, they did give that reason of, and I can buy that. I can buy the idea that a government would not just want to contain the disease, but not even let people know that the disease even existed for multiple reasons, because you don't want people panicking, and you also don't want them to know that they were housing, a biological weapon, and that they let it get out, that they let it get stolen. All those would be very problematic. So I can understand why they were like, we have to squash this idea, even that that this thing ever existed. But the whole plan of letting it go off the bridge, and I guess he knew it would explode at some point, but then there are the shots of like the bodies and the coffins like just floating in the water. And it was really devastating. Like the train crash scene was pretty intense, I thought. Especially given that not much had happened in the movie, that like the plague turned out to be nothing, and like most everybody recovered. Because at first I thought this movie was going to really, really be intense, because some of the first people that get sick were like, you saw the sick dog, you saw a sick baby, the sick little girl. And so it was playing up these really like vulnerable characters. So I was like, oh man, this movie's not playing around. It's going to take out these characters really early, and then it didn't. They got better. So the train crash, by comparison, was pretty brutal to watch, and it was pretty sad to see the scene where you had the aftermath. But then I thought, again, if he's trying to contain the idea of this disease as well as the disease itself, making the assumption that he thought this was like the plague, I'm pretty sure you don't want plague-ridden bodies just dumped in a town's water source. Like,
No, you don't.
There was no containment. You know what I mean? Like, I was like, all you did was kill those people. There was no containment.
That's the Cassandra Crossing sequel, when one of the coffins opens up and a kid touches it. And then Cassandra Crossing 2. I also wondered, because I was like, yeah, the coffins could come open, they could contaminate the water supply. He just assumed that the oxygenated air would blow up, which it would. I mean, that is kind of if you're making an oxygen-rich environment, you don't want any sort of flames, which is why they were confiscating everybody's matches and lighters. But that doesn't mean that everybody is going to die. And it doesn't mean that all the bodies and everything are going to burn up. So you're right. I mean, there's still vectors of illness, even if those 800 people didn't just walk off the train into the village somewhere, who are carrying it. Yeah.
It was and another just little thing that really drove, and this is, I think, might be why I kept thinking of Stormtroopers too, is there were quite a few shootouts on the train, and everybody had terrible aim. Like, everybody had terrible aim. It was one of those shootouts, for our listeners, since hopefully I'm not going to recommend you watch this movie, but if you really, really wanted to. But it was one of those type of shootouts where people were like hiding behind things, and then one guy would come out, bang, 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 bang. Then he'd hide again. Then another guy would pop out, bang, 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 bang. And then he'd hide again. And I'm like, y'all are shooting at air. Like, there's literally nobody you're shooting at this point.
But they were laying down suppressive fire. They were trying to hold them back.
I don't know what
not kill them.
It was not effective. Whatever they did, all they did was waste a bunch of my time.
Also, this is going back a little bit, but I have to put this out there. Burt Lancaster told whoever, we assume the president, we don't know, maybe it was like joint chief of staff. We don't know because the movie never told us, but he told the person he was ordering him that they went off the bridge. It's done. No survivors. Did you notice that no one went and checked? Like, there were no helicopters or airplanes or anybody. Like, they just are like, oh, look, our little video screen we've been watching this whole movie shows the train isn't there anymore, so they must all be dead. It's like, wow, the military is pretty inept.
Yeah, they were following a little like red blinking red dot on like a map, like a screen of a map, and then it just went black and they were like, "Oh good," exchanged evil glances. Um yeah, it was weird. I've got a little trivia for you guys here, and I'm curious to see if you can guess. I looked this up on Rotten Tomatoes. I don't know if you did. Um do you care to wager what percentage this got on Rotten Tomatoes?
I
Oh
would guess
man.
10 or lower.
I say 20s,
Okay.
like
Well,
25.
Rotten Tomato gave it a 30%. So it was much more optimistic than
Wow.
y'all were. Um, it's a special movie. I will point this out too, as far as trivia. The director of this movie. So it was written by George B. Cosmatos. I'm not sure if I say his name right, and Robert Katz and Tom Mankiewicz. George Cosmatos was director, who went on to direct Tombstone in the 90s.
I was going to say that he also directed the second Rambo movie, First Blood
Yeah,
Part 2.
he did.
Wow.
So, yeah,
That's
I
pretty
was
much his
surprised.
only credits is this movie, Tombstone, Rambo, and like a couple of other things that you've probably never heard of. But he did Tombstone, which is actually a good movie.
A good movie, yeah. So yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting because I was just like, wow, Tombstone is such a put together movie compared to this.
Poor George.
Uh, yeah, so I don't know, that was yeah, that was some trivia. I mentioned this before. I do want to talk about what I liked about the movie, because there were a few things, not many. There were a few things. Um, I liked that it had characters of, and this probably goes back, Mel, to what you were talking about, that this was kind of an Italian, West German, British combined effort. And there were actors who spoke all those languages. And at least the version I watched did not have subtitles on it, which I kind of like when I watch a movie like this, because it lends itself to a little bit of kind of cool authenticity. Because as you're following, because it's on a train, there's a point, kind of like with Airport and a little bit like the Poseidon Adventure, a little bit like the Towering Inferno. We've kind of seen this motif where before the disaster really gets going, you get to know and spend time with little pockets and groups of people. And on the train, it just kind of went through the train and you got to see some of the different people. And I liked getting to see, oh, here's a family, speaking Italian, or there's somebody over here speaking German. And it wouldn't necessarily pause on it long, but they'd kind of carry on a conversation. So I liked that. And then I really liked the character of the rabbi. I thought his story was pretty great. It really broke my heart when he realized that they were heading to Nuremberg and didn't want to go, and basically started fighting to get off the train. And when they had to sedate him, and that's when he started saying my wife and my children, and that just really broke my heart, because you realize that he had lost his family, and that's in part why he didn't want to go back. And I don't know, what were there things that you liked about this movie? Were you as affected by the rabbi as I was?
I thought it made sense with the time period of the movie that, because he didn't, he had been at Cassandra Crossing during the war. That was the camp that he was at. And so for him, he said several times, like, I can't go back to Poland. I can't be in Poland. And I thought they did a pretty good job of like building up that emotion. I I didn't like the merely a scratch that he got when he tried to escape from the train, but I think his motivations, even his suicide to stop the train from going into Poland, made sense, whereas some of the motivations of the other people did not make sense. So I felt that worked pretty well. And I have to admit, I thought Sophia Loren did as well as she could with the material that she had. Um, and like I said earlier, I felt like even if it didn't make sense, they definitely were trying to put more incidents in it and some action in it. I just wish that they had done more webbing together of those incidents and explanation of some of the characters.
I was a big fan of when the end credits rolled. That was my favorite part.
That was a good part. I think I shared on that part.
Seriously though, I do agree with both of you about the rabbi, and I did like him, and I thought the actor who played him did a great job, and he was really probably one of the best parts of the movie. But I don't want to just sit and retread what you've both said. As for the rest, if there's anything else that I liked, not really. It feels like it had so much promise at different places that it then squandered. Like when the Swedish guy who's infected on the train is wandering around and playing with like kids and that sort of thing. Like, yes, I agree the music was not subtle and headache inducing, but like it definitely, you could feel like, oh no, don't play with the kids, you're obviously sick with something horrible. And then when everyone starts to get sick, they show a shot of the little girl who 8-9 years old, who's covered in these sores or whatever, and it's like, oh god, oh wow, like they're going to like kill these people. Like I actually thought they might, these infected people were probably going to die. And then, miracle of miracles, that's not the case at all. Oxygen makes it not deadly. And, it's just squandered.
Right.
Like they actually had me worried about these characters, because, I mean, that's one thing I don't like seeing is kids dying in movies or animals. And, it had so much potential there. And then the ending, wherein the part of the train that gets uncoupled does come off the train, or does go over the bridge and collapse, and you see the aftermath, like that was a very well done part of a very poorly executed movie, and it could have been such good payoff, and it just was squandered. So I don't know, it just felt like a collection of a couple of good ideas and a lot of really bad ones, just sort of ham-fistedly slapped together.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Lisa,
I realized that I just turned that from things that I liked back into why this movie's terrible.
things you didn't like.
But I really don't think it's salvageable. Like, that's the problem.
Yeah. Oh, Lisa, I was going to ask, how did it fare with your rules of disaster movies?
Oh, I'll get there. No, I will say that, before I get to my rules, you said, how is this movie is not salvageable? And I really think that if this movie had been made where the disease, like where oxygen did not kill the disease or mutate it or whatever, or render it, harmless, if it had followed through on that promise of the disease being like a real, truly bad time disease, and kept it on a speeding train that was speeding towards, a certain death, whether that was on a, bridge or whatever. If they had kept that peril going and then stripped away all the other subplots and just kept the old man rabbi as trying to save the train, I think I might have loved this movie.
Okay, that I could get behind, especially if it were speeding towards this unstable bridge crossing because they didn't want to stop it because they didn't want the disease to spread further. And
Yes. Yeah.
yeah, because
Like
I almost thought
I
that's
would have
where it was
loved
going.
that.
But
I
no.
would have really, because I thought this movie, I mean, I did not want to see like the dog die or the kids die. But when they were the first ones to get sick, I was like, this movie's savage. Like this is going to be a good movie. And then it just so quickly backed off from that and was like, just kidding. Anyway, well, let's talk, because it was a disaster movie. And so I have my rules for disaster. I mean, number one, if we're looking at characterization, I think I had added this last time that it had to have kids and lovable elderly people, which check. This definitely had that. You had multiple babies. You had the little girl who was annoying O.J. Simpson with her bubbles. You had the old man rabbi who I loved. I think I added this last time too. You had to have a ticking clock to add to that sense of peril. And this did not have a literal ticking clock, but there was a time limit to it. You know, they had to fix it. They had to figure out how to stop the train before it got to the bridge. So that worked. And at one point they did start counting down because they were like, you know, oh, we only got 12 miles or whatever. So I liked that. They had those. We did have people climbing on things very perilously, but nobody ever said don't look down, which was a little disappointing. I don't think we had a woman say I can't do this, which I will say, circling back to what Mel had said about Sophia Loren's character, she did a lot with what she was given, and I kind of liked her character, and I liked that they let her be, if not the hero, then a helper to the hero in a way that was lovely to see, because some of these other movies just had the women running around in like ball gowns and heels and like saying, I can't do this, oh my gosh, you know, we're gonna die. And she was very strong in the midst of all this. She was kind of like, let's roll up our sleeves and do it, which I liked. A man taking charge while another argues. We didn't really, they all worked together pretty well. I mean, once they were up against the stormtroopers, who were not stormtroopers, but the guys who were all dressed in white, they kind of got together to, they banded together to fight against them pretty well. Let's see, nobody said promise me you'll be back. So this one did not hit all my lines of dialogue, but I think we've already said the dialogue was pretty terrible in this movie. But my death rules. The ones who don't listen. See, not many people died, except, I mean, we didn't realize who died at the beginning. There were 2 people who died of the original plague. Then there were 2 people on the train who were infected. And then you had the people who died in the train crash, which, so really you only get the sacrificial death, who is also the one that everybody loved, when the old man like sacrifices himself. Oh, I guess
OJ sacrifices himself for the girl.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I
And
forgot
Martin
about
Sheen
that.
sacrificed himself to try to get to the engineer.
Well, he didn't really sacrifice himself as much as he was shot off the train.
Well, that's true.
He was trying to be heroic. We could call him the one who almost makes it. And then the sacrificial death was O.J. Simpson's character. And then the one that everybody loves and feels truly sad for was the rabbi, who was also a sacrifice. So there, I mean, it fit my rules as far as some of the characters and some of the deaths, most of the deaths, but it did not with the dialogue. It was a disappointment. The dialogue was a great disappointment to me. I will say this about the movie. If you want to watch something truly bizarre and watch a disaster movie that somehow manages to put in multiple disasters and still not be exciting, then Cassandra Crossing might be the one you want to watch. Probably watch it with a group of friends. maybe have some alcohol involved. You could probably turn it into one of those bad movie nights. I think that could be a lot of fun. If, however, you want to watch a good train movie, I would just say skip over this completely. Watch something like Snowpiercer or To the Train to Busan and just skip over it completely. Um, I don't know. If you guys do watch it or if you have watched it in the past, then please let us know because I'm curious. I'm really curious to know other people's thoughts on this movie. It was so weird. It was just bananas. So, with that in mind, we're at No Fear Cast on Twitter and Instagram, and we have a Facebook page. If you'd like to contact us by email, you can certainly do that. The email address is nofearcast@gmail.com. If you love what we're doing, consider supporting us on Patreon and get access to exclusive content, or simply rate and review us, which is entirely free, but it does help other listeners find us. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back in 2 weeks with a brand new episode, hopefully something much more entertaining than the Cassandra Crossing.